The king, heartbroken after losing his beloved, fell into despair. For 7 years, he hadn't touched a woman. He even issued a nationwide ban on marriage. In all those years, not a single person got married. The royal eunuchs secretly put medicine in the king's tea, rumored to be powerful enough to help even a dying old man produce an heir. He also arranged for Lana, a woman known for her skills in the bedchamber, to serve the king. Lana respectfully brewed tea for the king, setting the stage for what was to come. After taking a sip, the king felt something was off. The eunuch's plan had succeeded. Lana quickly helped the king remove his robe. The medicine was taking full effect. The eunuch quietly closed the door. But then, the king suddenly realized the woman before him wasn't the crown princess. He grabbed his sword and struck at her. Lana collapsed to the ground. The king, furious, demanded to know who was behind this. Seeing Lana run out, the eunuch stepped forward. The king questioned him. The eunuch said everything was done for the sake of continuing the royal bloodline. The king drew his sword in anger, ready to strike, but was stopped by a swift figure, his trusted confidant, Shin-won. Shin-won pleaded with the king to let go of the past, to abolish the marriage ban, and to take new consorts to bring peace to the nation. Back when the king was still the crown prince, he deeply loved his crown princess. He had promised never to take another woman, vowing to love her alone for the rest of his life. The crown princess once said that while he might be a beloved future king, he should not expose his weaknesses. Just like a lake may appear calm on the surface, it could be rotting underneath. She felt like that lake, alone and unsupported, destined to be swept away by the storm. Perhaps the prince hadn't understood her words at the time. When they parted, she was actually bidding him farewell. She told him that if she ever left one day, he shouldn't grieve for her, but live well instead. The two promised to be together forever, but the crown princess didn't seal the promise with a pinky swear. Instead, she lovingly waved goodbye. The prince thought she didn't want to commit, and left heartbroken. Not long after, news came from the palace. She had died. As her husband, he wasn't even allowed to approach her. They said her death was due to a crime related to her family's fall from grace. He held his beloved crown princess in his arms. From that day on, he never remarried. It turns out the crown princess had been murdered 7 years ago, and the killer was never found. Because of this, many young men and women lived in sorrow, unable to marry. One of them was Sorang, a fortune teller who, despite the marriage ban, secretly acted as a matchmaker. She helped young men and women find love, even facilitating secret ceremonies. Her business thrived, and she always managed to avoid being caught. The men often joked, "We're all going to stay bachelors anyway. What's the point of saving money?" Sorang would say that getting married wasn't that hard, as long as people were willing to keep it a secret. One day, Sorang left her business card and quickly slipped away before the royal inspectors arrived. She hoped to open a wedding agency in the capital and found a perfect location with her grandfather. She named it Love Pavilion. The landlord, worried about violating the ban, hesitated. But Sorang assured him that money could solve any problem. They struck a deal. "How can people talk about the future," she said, "when no one is even allowed to marry?" Rumors were spreading that the king was incapable of marrying. Ministers pleaded with him to lift the ban. The king, suffering from headaches, said this year he would consider abolishing it. The king even dreamed of the crown princess, blaming himself for her death. He woke up desperately trying to find her. Meanwhile, women around him urged him to move on and finally lift the marriage ban. The ban has lasted for 3 years. Sorang's Love Pavilion business was flourishing. She even hired a charming receptionist to attract clients. To investigate the cause behind the ban and its effects, one of the king's close friends visited Love Pavilion. When he heard Sorang claim to be an expert in matchmaking, he became alarmed. The authorities began spreading news about the ban. While Sorang was giving a presentation, one of her guests suddenly told her about the king. As she tried to escape, Sorang accidentally bumped into a mysterious man. Realizing he was one of the investigators, Sorang fled. Coincidentally, the king was also chasing her at that time. This time, Sorang was completely stunned. That woman? She was the most powerful fortune teller in Joseon. With just one glance at the king, the woman diagnosed that he was surrounded by ghostly energy. Sorang asked the king, "Do you struggle to sleep at night? Do you sometimes hear voices calling you?" The king was shocked. Every symptom perfectly matched his condition. The king demanded she summon the spirit of the crown princess. Sorang responded that the crown princess's soul had long since vanished. The king said if she couldn't do it, she might as well go collect her last meal. Fearing for her life, Sorang switched into survival mode and began to act. She twisted her body, pretending to be possessed. Through her performance, she conveyed the sorrow of the crown princess, who said she still missed the king, hadn't reincarnated, and was lingering in the mortal world. Overcome with emotion, the king approached Sorang, wanting to get closer to what he believed was his beloved wife's spirit. He gently held Sorang's hand. Snapping out of character, Sorang told him, "Your wife has already left." The king looked at her, unable to believe it. He ordered Sorang to stay in the palace, so he could see the crown princess anytime he wished. His attendant, Hyun-min, escorted Sorang to her new residence in the palace. As they crossed a bridge, peach blossoms floated down from the sky. The king, wandering the palace grounds, happened to see Sorang on the bridge. In a brief hallucination, he mistook her for the crown princess. He walked straight toward her and embraced her tightly. Hyun-min was stunned at what he was witnessing. The king held Sorang in his arms for a long time before realizing she wasn't his late wife. Trying to save face, he pretended it had all been a mistake. The next day, Sorang returned to the love pavilion to gather her belongings and prepare to move into the palace full-time. Her co-workers envied her. She'd now get to see the king every day. But Sorang was filled with dread. She had to keep deceiving the king, pretending to be the crown princess. The end of the marriage ban might just depend on her performance. On her first day in the palace, Sorang tripped and fell flat on the ground, hugging the floor. This angered the palace steward, who scolded her to walk properly. Since she was now the king's personal court lady, she had to undergo palace training. Later that evening at dinner time, Sorang stood beside the king, serving him. Seeing the table full of delicious dishes, her stomach growled uncontrollably. The sound made the king, who had no appetite to begin with, lose interest in eating altogether. He dismissed everyone from the room, except Sorang. In the awkward silence, Sorang blurted out, "I'm your personal attendant." Trying to stay in character, she explained that ridding ghostly energy used up a lot of physical energy, so she got hungry quickly. Then, pretending to channel the crown princess, she added, "I'm hungry." "What?" the king asked. "Why? Shall we eat together?" But hearing that the crown princess was hungry, the king insisted that Sorang join him for the meal. Sorang didn't hold back. She ate freely and with gusto, which amused the king greatly. After the meal, Sorang even acted out a graceful, ladylike bow. The king, surprisingly, played along and waved his hand regally. The steward was shocked that all the food had been eaten. That night, the king couldn't sleep again. He kept hearing strange sounds, so he summoned Sorang and asked if she could get rid of them. Sorang explained that odd noises were usually the result of physical weakness. The king wasn't convinced. He called in Hyun-min and challenged him to a long-overdue warm-up sparring session. "Don't go easy on him," the king said. Hyun-min replied, "As your subject, I cannot defeat you." Their duel was thrilling. Sorang watched with great interest, completely captivated. Just as the king prepared to show off his skills, he tripped and fell, by his own doing. Hyun-min hurried forward to help, but the king awkwardly got up on his own, unsure of what to say or feel. He brushed it off and said, "Let's try again next time." Then he called for Sorang to leave with him. The king confessed to Sorang that he felt a bit out of shape. In response, Sorang, trying to motivate him to exercise more, praised Hyun-min's posture as stronger and more masculine. The king teased her for having such poor taste and proudly showed off his physique, leaving Sorang completely stunned. That night, she suspected she wouldn't be able to sleep. Later, the king gazed out the window and imagined seeing the crown princess. The insomnia worsened, and he called for Sorang to accompany him. It was clear, he missed the crown princess deeply. Sorang offered, "Shall I summon her again?" In his grief, the king whispered to the imagined spirit, saying he couldn't bear to be without her. He repeated to himself that he needed to stay strong and couldn't let go. The crown princess's spirit encouraged him to stay resilient before fading away again, leaving the king heartbroken once more. Sorang, unable to hold back, gently wiped away his tears. That night, the king finally slept peacefully. Sorang, however, was lost in thought. Would she always have to live as the shadow of a woman he couldn't forget? A malicious stepmother, desiring happiness for her own daughter, sent assassins to push the noble lady, Sorang, off a cliff. Days before the ceremony, Shin-won, the groom-to-be, disguised himself as a commoner to secretly observe his future bride. But the girl he met seemed too young, immature, and behaved violently toward her maids. He quickly realized she wasn't the woman he was supposed to marry. Just as he was about to leave, peach blossoms began to fall. Looking up, he saw a beautiful woman by a distant window, his real bride. Sorang, preparing for the wedding, drank a sip of rice wine and looked at the marriage document. The groom's name, Shin-won. Sorang began to worry about how she'd handle the complicated family dynamic after the wedding. Shin-won reassured her, "Don't worry. I'll always be on your side." The kind and noble lady, Sorang, even gave her embroidered shoes to the second daughter. Shin-won saw this and felt happy that his bride was so gentle and selfless. Later, Shin-won overheard some commotion and Sorang noticed something suspicious outside the window. Even separated by a wall, they could sense each other's presence. The wedding day finally arrived. Shin-won, dressed in ceremonial robes, was ready for the marriage ritual. But when he looked up at the bride, he noticed something was off. She had been swapped. His real bride had vanished. The imposter panicked when her lie was exposed, and just then, the authorities arrived. It turned out the kingdom had enforced the marriage ban, making the entire wedding invalid. Shin-won didn't marry the woman he loved and remained single for years. But fate had its own plans. Years later, they met again. Sorang had become a renowned shaman and the king's personal court lady. When Shin-won saw her, he couldn't help but call out to her. Sorang, knowing she couldn't reveal the truth, kept her feelings buried deep inside. When the king began hearing eerie sounds again, it was Shin-won who suggested that Sorang investigate. Sorang ran through the palace grounds and suddenly noticed a hole in the ground beneath her feet. It was obvious someone had deliberately buried a bamboo tube to transmit eerie sounds and scare the king. Just as she was about to report back, the red string in her hair fell off. Meanwhile, the king was waiting for Sorang's return. Sorang, excited and rushing back, slipped. The king couldn't get out of the way in time. Both of them fell into the dirt. Sorang panicked, thinking this was the end for her. Suddenly, a figure appeared in the water and pulled Sorang into an embrace, saving her. It was none other than Lee Shin-won. They both suddenly remembered. The most important person was still missing. At that moment, the eunuch pulled the king out of the water. Thankfully, he was unharmed. Sorang apologized for her clumsiness, but the king didn't blame her. Then his gaze shifted to Shin-won. Sensing danger, Shin-won felt uneasy. He helped the king back to the palace. The king jokingly accused Shin-won of prioritizing beauty over duty. Meanwhile, Sorang hadn't even changed her wet clothes and came straight to serve food, which made Shin-won worry even more. While drying the king, Sorang felt awkward seeing him wet and shirtless. But the king was even more embarrassed, especially when Sorang commented on his toned, artistic body. She couldn't help but admire it aloud. The king, pleased by her words, smiled and asked her to turn around while he changed. He placed a red cloth over her to shield her eyes. After changing, they prepared to sleep. The king couldn't fall asleep, so Sorang chatted with him for a while until he dozed off. In his dreams, he saw the crown princess again. Overwhelmed by longing, he passionately kissed her. But when he opened his eyes, he realized it was Sorang's lips. The king was utterly flustered. Thankfully, Sorang was asleep, with her eyes open. He gently pushed her over and ordered Shin-won to escort her out. Looking at the sleeping Sorang, Shin-won remembered giving her mouth-to-mouth earlier. He didn't know how to face her anymore. Meanwhile, the king couldn't stop thinking about that accidental kiss. He tried to convince himself it was just a mistake. Shin-won realized he had truly fallen for Sorang. The love triangle between the three was about to get even more complicated. To help convince the king to abolish the marriage ban, Sorang brought him a banned book on love and intimacy. The king was furious upon seeing it and threw the book across the room. Sorang quickly ran out. Shin-won asked if the book had any effect. Judging from Sorang's expression, it clearly hadn't worked. Sorang ended up distributing the banned books to others. The eunuch declined, saying he had no use for them. Sorang then gave one to Shin-won. Though reluctant, he accepted. Meanwhile, the Queen Dowager instructed the eunuch to bring the king a special herbal tonic to invigorate him. The king drank a sip and immediately felt a strange heat surge through his body. He ordered the eunuch to leave. Spotting the book still nearby, he curiously glanced at it. Surprisingly, he found it intriguing and kept it for himself. On Shin-won's side, he was getting so into reading the book that his usual calm demeanor disappeared. He even admitted that it was physically exhausting to get through and planned to visit the king with Sorang. In the palace garden, the king took a stroll. Watching the birds fly in pairs made him feel envious. Even the palace guards seemed to be flirting openly. The king's mood lifted as he came across a vibrant red flower. His mind drifted to the sensual illustrations in the book. Declaring he needed some purification, he said he was going to go practice swordsmanship to clear his mind. Meanwhile, Sorang and Shin-won were doing combat drills together. Sorang asked Shin-won if he had read the intimate book yet. Shin-won casually replied, "It's normal for men to read that kind of thing." Sorang added, "Everyone who's read it said it made them feel incredibly fulfilled." Just then, the king happened to walk by and saw the two of them in a rather suggestive pose. The king, clearly upset, stormed off. That night, when Sorang arrived at the palace, she found a neatly arranged set of romance books. The king insisted he hadn't read any of them recently, but Sorang wasn't convinced and pressed him about it. And just like that, their relationship entered a new phase. The girl begins chasing the guy. While reading through the book, Sorang looked at an illustration and teasingly asked the king if he'd ever had certain thoughts about her. The king grabbed her wrist. He stared at her in silence. Just as Sorang turned to leave, the king pulled her tightly into his embrace. The lighting team clearly knew what they were doing. Everything was set for romance. They stood face to face. It felt like the moment could erupt at any second. Sorang's face turned red with anticipation. The eunuch, seeing all of this, was convinced. The king liked Sorang. He immediately began preparing for the two to finally share a room. He had food delivered, arranged a skincare treatment for Sorang, applied exquisite makeup, and dressed her in a luxurious ceremonial robe. Tonight had to succeed. As the palace doors opened dramatically, the king saw Sorang dressed entirely in red. Just as she was about to walk toward him, a hand suddenly pulled her away. It was Shin-won. Would the king let Sorang go so easily? Now, rewinding to the beginning. Due to the king's decree of a 7-year marriage ban, citizens could only date and matchmake in secret. A bespectacled man, clearly unimpressed, was shown a potential bride. His cousin insisted, "She's the prettiest girl in our family." Still, he was unconvinced. The girl stormed off, and the man grumbled, "I'm going to report this matchmaking agency." Just then, a royal attendant brought him tea. As he looked up, he was stunned by the dazzling beauty of the woman before him. His heart skipped a beat. This woman was Sorang, recently returned from the palace. She asked her assistant, Hyun, to pour her a cup of water. The bespectacled man couldn't take his eyes off Hyun. The elderly master of Love Pavilion proudly said, "Hyun is our most famous girl here. If you like her, I can help set you up." 2 other single men overheard and got even more excited than the first man. The elderly master said that once Hyun came out, the bespectacled man should go bump into her on purpose. As Hyun was carrying tea, the two really did collide. In that moment, something important fell from the bespectacled man's robe. It was an intimate romance book. He tried to touch Hyun, but she caught a glimpse of the book's content and immediately slapped him. Just then, Sorang opened the door and saw the book lying on the ground. She was stunned. The bespectacled man tried to run away. What followed was a chaotic chase through the streets. But soon, he couldn't run anymore. Turns out, Sorang wasn't chasing him, she was chasing the book. The man asked in frustration, "Is it a crime to fail at flirting?" Sorang sighed, "This book is a masterpiece. How could the king not fall for someone after reading it?" On another front, one of Sorang's former acquaintances from her family saw her in the streets and reported it to her evil stepmother. The stepmother immediately plotted to eliminate her again. Years ago, she had poisoned Sorang's father, leaving him bedridden, and had caused Sorang's biological mother's death as well. Now, she clung to a powerful noble family and was scheming to replace the king. To confirm whether Sorang was truly still alive, the stepmother went to the love pavilion. Fortunately, Sorang wasn't there. The old master, however, saw through the stepmother's true nature. To ease her suspicion, he offered to read her fortune. He declared, "You're the future queen mother. One of your daughters will become queen of Joseon." The stepmother was elated, convinced her daughter would rule the land. She rushed home and shared the prophecy. Her daughter, however, began analyzing the wording carefully. She remembered her mother's past scandals and grew uneasy. And then it hit her: Sorang was also her daughter. 7 years ago, the stepmother had pushed Sorang off a cliff, yet she still lived. Now, Sorang's return threatened everything. The king had arrived at the royal hunting grounds, planning the day's strategy. Just as he was gearing up, Sorang suddenly appeared. The king asked, "Weren't you supposed to be in the palace?" Sorang replied seriously, "As your personal exorcist, I have to be here. The hunting grounds are surrounded by sacred trees, and that attracts spirits. I came to protect you." The king smiled faintly but said nothing. Sorang, thinking only of getting to eat meat at tonight's banquet, decided to hype the king up. But just as the king aimed his arrow, a flashback hit him. He remembered accidentally knocking out the crown princess during a previous hunt. Ever since then, he had trauma around hunting. And with Sorang's mischievous antics throwing off his focus, he didn't hit a single target. Frustrated, the king threatened, "If you keep this up, I'll have you sent back." Sorang teased back, "It's your bad aim, not my fault." Soon, the trio mounted their horses and galloped through the grounds. Sorang was amazed. Hunting is actually so much fun. Then she spotted something in the distance. The king reassured her, "This area is man-made. There's no way a real wild boar would show up." Sorang thought maybe she was just seeing things. But sure enough, a giant wild boar really charged out from the trees. The king was stunned. The beast ran straight for Sorang, who had just tripped over a tree branch and fallen. The boar was almost on her. In a flash, the king picked up a sword and hurled it at the boar. Sorang passed out. In her unconscious state, she saw her late mother in a vision. Fortunately, Sorang survived, though shaken. And they now had a very real wild boar on their hands. The royal ministers soon arrived. Seeing the king had brought down a beast by himself, they cheered. That night, the royal banquet began. The king was in good spirits, but as he scanned the palace hall, Sorang was nowhere to be seen. He quickly offered a round of wine to the ministers, "Please, eat well," and left. His mind was completely preoccupied with one thing: did Sorang get to eat meat tonight? Meanwhile, Sorang was lying in her quarters, dazed and weak. The king, seeing her like that, feared she had been possessed. Sorang suddenly fainted onto her bed. The king felt her forehead; it was burning up. The eunuch summoned a local village doctor. As the doctor was about to perform a treatment, the king grew tense. The doctor reassured him, "This is a Western medical method. Works fast." Shin-won objected, "This doesn't seem appropriate between a man and woman." The doctor brushed it off, saying, "To a doctor, there are only symptoms, not genders." The king and Shin-won awkwardly looked away. After examining her, the doctor gave a diagnosis and prescribed some medicine, instructing that Sorang should rest well. The king then turned to Shin-won, "You may leave. I'll care for her personally." The king reached out to gently touch Sorang's face. But she suddenly grabbed his hand and cried out, "You lied to me! Oh heavens, why did you lie to me?" The king recalled the kiss from before and tried to explain, "That happened while I was asleep." But Sorang interrupted, still fuming. Then, without warning, she pulled the king closer, and they kissed. Unbeknownst to them, Shin-won happened to witness it all from outside the door. Days passed. The king hadn't seen his beloved palace maid. Suddenly, Sorang appeared, startling him. Turns out she had gone home for a few days after feeling homesick. The king had given her a 3-day leave and even asked Shin-won to escort her. Now seeing her return, the king was secretly bothered. He had let someone else, not himself, stay by her side. When they reached her home, Shin-won kindly helped her down from the horse. But Sorang, feeling like just a poor commoner, declined his help and dismounted herself. They finally had a moment alone. Shin-won asked, "What do you really think of the king?" Sorang smiled, "He's very cute, especially the way he clutched me during the ghost exorcism, adorably clueless." Shin-won paused. "I'm worried about you. Because you resemble the crown princess. If the king starts confusing his feelings." He trailed off, then asked plainly, "Would I still be able to like you?" Their situation was just like a butterfly that flutters in unexpectedly, beautiful but fleeting. Shin-won wished to get closer to Sorang, but deep down he knew he was just the second male lead. The next day, the two went out shopping. Shin-won noticed Sorang's shoes were worn out and brought her to a shoe stall. Sorang, ever humble, said, "I'm just a vagrant. I don't deserve embroidered shoes." But Shin-won gently picked out a pair and had her sit down. He knelt and personally put the new shoes on her feet. For a moment, it felt like maybe she could be with him. That brief hope, that simple gesture, carried a quiet kind of heartbreak. Sorang finally returned to the palace. Her first task back? Helping the king fall asleep. He complained of insomnia, and she cheerfully suggested, "Then let's drink a bit." The king was surprised but intrigued. They brought out side dishes, poured the drinks, and faced off. Sorang boasted, "I'm a seasoned veteran at this." The king smirked, "Tonight, I'll make sure you crawl out of here on all fours." Several rounds in, Sorang noticed the king wasn't getting tipsy. To raise the stakes, she proposed a game of truth or dare. Whoever couldn't answer would drink. Sorang was about to enter the selection room, where she would be formally chosen as a royal companion. The king stood, mesmerized by her beauty. But just as Sorang stepped inside, a hand grabbed her. It was Shin-won. The king's expression instantly changed. Shin-won confronted Sorang. "Why are you going to the selection? Don't you know tonight is the consummation night? That's why you're dressed like this, isn't it?" He pulled her into his arms. At that moment, the king arrived. Sorang quickly wriggled free. The king asked sharply, "Explain yourselves. Why did you suddenly take her away?" Shin-won replied, "I don't approve of what's happening to her." The king shot back, "This is the royal court. Your opinion means nothing." Shin-won said, "Then let's settle it. If I win, I'll take her with me." The king agreed. "If you can defeat me, she's yours." And so the two men dueled with bows and arrows, fighting for love. With every shot, tensions rose. Shin-won finally slashed the king's robe, a grave offense punishable by death. Sorang was horrified, caught between them. The king raised his arrow toward Shin-won. But Sorang stepped between them and cried, "If you love me, then protect Shin-won." The words echoed. At last, the king lowered his weapon. He spared Shin-won. Sorang returned to the royal quarters with the king. But he couldn't help but ask, "Why did you side with him?" Sorang looked at the king with mixed emotions swirling in her eyes. "Am I really that important to you?" she asked quietly. "Or am I just a replacement for the crown princess?" Her voice trembled, but her gaze remained steady. "Have you actually fallen in love with me?" The king didn't reply. She added, "I'm not carrying your child. I'm not even officially one of your women. Perhaps I never will be." The king's face was unreadable. "You're right," he said, after a pause. "Sometimes I want to take all those women and just leave it all behind." But then his voice hardened. "If Shin-won dares take you away tonight, I can have him punished for treason." Sorang's eyes flared with anger. "If you do that," she said, "I will never forgive you." The king looked down at his royal robe, slashed by Shin-won's blade. Would he really allow his bond with his sworn brother to unravel because of one woman? Meanwhile, Sorang had gone to find Shin-won. She begged him not to lose himself over her. Shin-won, torn between honor and love, looked at her helplessly. "Are you worried about me?" he asked. "Do you like me? Even after everything I've done for you?" Sorang's answer was gentle, but firm. "We can only ever be friends. We can't cross that line." She turned and walked away, leaving Shin-won standing in silence. Back at the palace, the king summoned Shin-won once more. He declared he would forgive the robe-slashing incident, but only on one condition. Shin-won must protect Sorang at all costs, but he must never fall in love with her. Shin-won hesitated. Then, with quiet defiance, he asked the king, "Have you already forgotten the crown princess?" That question struck something deep. The king's memory stirred. Images of the crown princess returned to him like distant echoes. He had tried so hard to forget her. But the more he let go, the worse her spiritual presence had become. Had he truly loved her at all? And why? Why did Sorang's face look exactly like hers? The horrifying truth began to unravel. This was no coincidence. Someone had planned all of it. They'd used manipulation to invade the king's mind, starting with strange noises, followed by a ghostly vision of the crown princess appearing over the lake. The illusion had been so real, the king believed it. He had rushed toward the water, desperate to reclaim what was lost. But Sorang had stopped him. "That's not her," she said, eyes blazing with conviction. The court assembled at the Love Pavilion. A royal scholar, Mr. Kim, examined the ceremonial wedding gown. The gown worn by the real crown princess had been stitched with golden thread and carefully kept by her father. But the one worn by the woman in the lake had bright thread. It was a counterfeit. The real gown had been stolen, and whoever wore it was the imposter. It was all a scheme. Evidence surfaced fast. A mirror was recovered from the lake, revealing that smoke and reflections had been used to create the illusion of a woman appearing and disappearing like a ghost. The woman who looked like the crown princess wasn't a spirit. She was real, and still hiding somewhere inside the palace. The king ordered a full investigation. Every servant's identity would be verified, every room searched. But before the investigation began, the traitors' men made their move. One of them had found Sorang. He knew she, too, had entered the palace under false pretenses. Sorang had no idea what was happening. She insisted she was just a proper palace maid. But they weren't looking for just any maid, they were after her. Palace guards took her away before Shin-won could return. Elsewhere, the fake crown princess still hadn't been captured. The king suspected she was hiding among the soldiers. Using troop inspection as a cover, he searched for the imposter himself. He would be able to tell. Then he spotted someone suspicious. A soldier who stood rigid and refused to raise their head. The king approached, reached out, and personally lifted the soldier's helmet. What he saw froze him. The face underneath was identical to the crown princess. The king struggled to stay calm. He reminded himself, the crown princess was gone. This was a trick. He demanded answers. "Who sent you? Who ordered you to impersonate her?" Before she could speak, the traitor appeared and shouted, "She's dangerous. Let me finish her off." But the king protected her. "Take her alive," he ordered. Just then, a guard came rushing in, breathless. "Your Majesty, Sorang has been taken." After her arrest, Sorang was taken to an undisclosed location. When the king arrived, he saw Sorang, bloodied, bruised. Without hesitation, the king removed his own dragon robe and gently covered Sorang's broken body. His fury knew no bounds. Those who had laid a hand on her were immediately punished. Weak and barely conscious, Sorang collapsed into his arms. The king cradled her and carried her back to his quarters. Thankfully, Sorang's injuries were not fatal. The king, riddled with guilt, blamed himself for not protecting her. From that day forward, he vowed not to let Sorang be a substitute for anyone. He intended to keep her by his side. But peace in the palace was short-lived. A new palace maid was assigned to Sorang's quarters, one whose face was eerily similar to the late crown princess. The king was once again haunted by memories of her tragic death. Loyal ministers warned him, this was no coincidence. It was a trap and a warning to Sorang. Sorang, sensing danger, tried to investigate the new maid's sudden appearance. But Shin-won pulled her away just in time. He revealed a terrifying truth. Every maid who had grown close to the king in the past had died under mysterious circumstances. This time, the target was Sorang. Shin-won begged her to leave the palace. "Let me protect you," he pleaded. But once again, Sorang rejected his offer. Her loyalty, and perhaps something deeper, kept her tied to the king's side. Meanwhile, the traitor moved to silence witnesses. He entered the prison and quickly ordered the death of the scapegoat who might expose him. By the time Shin-won arrived, it was too late, but he found something chilling, the very dagger once used in an attempt on his life. His suspicions turned to the traitor. But despite Shin-won's interrogation, the traitor was clever, slippery, and without concrete evidence, he had to be released for now. The king ordered an investigation starting with the mysterious maid who resembled the crown princess. Her name was Cheon-in, and she came from Wonju. She'd once been a servant there, but according to a local madam, she'd been abducted just a month after arriving. This wasn't just about impersonation, it was human trafficking. While searching a remote storage site in the hills, Shin-won found signs of captivity, a woman's shoe left behind in the dust. At the same time, royal guards dredged a well and retrieved a gown, stitched with golden thread. The very gown once worn by the real crown princess. The truth was about to surface. The entire plot had been orchestrated by the traitor. He had discovered Cheon-in, who looked just like the late crown princess, and transformed her into a perfect replica. But she was under constant threat. If she failed to deceive the king, she would be killed. Fate intervened. Cheon-in fell, and with her fall came evidence of the traitor's schemes. Not only had he deceived the king, but he was also tied to a larger underground ring involved in trafficking young girls. Desperate to protect himself, the traitor silenced Cheon-in, eliminating her before she could speak. The king grieved the crown princess once again. In his drunken sorrow, he mistook a passing court lady for her and even vowed to join her in the afterlife. Sorang rushed to stop him and cleverly instructed the servants to serve strong wine to sober him up. "I will bring the crown princess back," Sorang declared. The king watched her with hope. Miraculously, or so it seemed, Sorang succeeded in reviving the spirit of the crown princess. The king, overwhelmed, asked, "Why did you leave 7 years ago?" "The resurrected," crown princess replied, "you must let go of the past." "I loved you," the king said with trembling voice. Was it wrong for the prince consort to love his own wife? Sorang, maintaining the illusion, responded quickly, "The crown princess's love wasn't romantic, it was loyalty, concern." The king grew conflicted. Her words echoed in his mind. He stopped attending court, distracted, heartsick. Ministers grew anxious. Documents piled up without approval. But the king couldn't shake one question. Did she ever truly love me? Sorang pressed him. Did the crown princess ever say she loved you? Ever speak those words? The king thought hard. She had never said it outright, only implied it through actions and duty. Then maybe, Sorang offered gently, it's time to let her go. Still, the king couldn't. He needed to know the truth. Desperate, he sought out the crown princess's father and asked directly, "Did she ever love me?" Her father replied awkwardly, "She should have." "Should have?" the king repeated bitterly. That wasn't enough. Sorang proposed one last course. Find the crown princess's old servants. Dressed in plain clothes, they traveled to Gangneung under cover of night. The first to be questioned was a maid from the crown princess's family household. Sorang asked, when she was chosen to marry into the palace, was she happy? The answer was immediate. Happy? Not at all. She cried. She didn't want to leave her hometown. After the wedding, she barely sent letters. Just one every few years. Sorang thanked the maid and let her go. The king, reflecting deeply, whispered, "Perhaps she didn't love me before entering the palace, but what if she fell in love with me after?" Still uncertain, he called in the palace nanny who had once served the crown princess. Sorang, watching from nearby, asked the old woman directly, had the crown princess ever truly loved the king? The nanny hesitated, then spoke truthfully. His Majesty cherished the crown princess deeply, but his overwhelming protection and indulgence made her life in the palace difficult. He never followed the elders' suggestions to conceive an heir, and rumors spread that he often wept alone. Sorang pressed once more, was her affection ever real? The nanny answered softly, there was sincerity. Perhaps not love as you wish to define it, but there was deep, heartfelt truth. The king, who had been quietly listening, was visibly shaken. Later, Sorang discreetly handed the nanny a reward for her carefully rehearsed answers. It had all been part of Sorang's plan. Shin-won, however, had uncovered the deception. "Why would you do this?" he asked her. Sorang only smiled and replied, "Do you really want me to remain unmarried forever? If the palace marriage ban isn't lifted, how will any of us find peace?" Frustrated, Shin-won turned to leave, but Sorang stopped him. She softened her voice, teasing and coaxing like a younger sister. Her gentle words melted his resistance. "I'll keep your secret," he said at last, "but you must promise me, don't fall in love with the king." Her silence said everything. The next morning, the king awoke to the sight of his beloved palace maid, peacefully sleeping by his side. Stepping softly, he left the bedroom, careful not to wake her. A palace eunuch noticed the king's glowing expression, so different from his usual weariness. "Even I'm moved," the eunuch remarked quietly. "His Majesty is truly a beautiful man." Just the day before, the king had kissed Sorang while she was bathing. Shocked and hurt, she had pushed him away. "You don't love me," she said. "You still see me as a substitute for the crown princess." She wasn't wrong. The king had never explicitly confessed his feelings. Sorang, her heart confused and aching, decided to leave. In his own turmoil, the king confided in his closest minister. "I like her, but I don't know how to say it." The minister simply chuckled. "Your Majesty, you're the most handsome man in the realm. What woman could resist you?" Meanwhile, Shin-won approached Sorang, asking if she truly intended to leave the palace. The palace was already compiling the list of court ladies to be released. Sorang, unsure of her future with the king, began considering departure. The list eventually reached the king. As he scanned it, his gaze froze. Sorang's name was there. Without hesitation, he rushed toward her quarters. Sorang was packing her belongings when he burst through the doors. "Why do you want to leave?" he asked breathlessly. "If you stay here, I'll do whatever it takes." But Sorang remained silent, resolute in her decision. What she didn't know was that the king had been preparing to confess his love. The court minister had even arranged a stunning flower display for the occasion. But now, it all felt meaningless. "Maybe she just doesn't know your true feelings," the minister urged. The king decided he would confess in person. He ordered the flowers to be replanted at the palace gate. This time, his confession had to succeed. At the same time, Shin-won informed Sorang that he too had resigned and would be leaving the palace. She thanked him sincerely for his unwavering protection. "Let's be lifelong friends," she said with a bittersweet smile. Shin-won only nodded. He had already accepted that her heart belonged to someone else. Just then, the king arrived. Shin-won respectfully bowed, then quietly walked away, knowing that Sorang had made her choice. He had missed his chance, and now, all he could do was offer his blessing from afar. The king turned to Sorang. "Are you leaving because I never confessed?" Sorang's voice trembled. "I gave you my heart. Couldn't you see that?" In that moment, the king understood. She had loved him all along. Overcome, he finally said the words she had longed to hear. "I love you." Sorang's eyes filled with tears, not of sorrow, but of relief. She was no longer a shadow of the past. The king stepped forward, gently holding Sorang close. This time, nothing stood between them. Sorang finally accepted the king's feelings. With joy shining in his eyes, he led her to a field of flowers he had planted himself. In that moment, the king knelt and offered her a bouquet, asking her to become his beloved. Sorang, moved by the sincerity in his gaze, took the flowers into her hands. She had never felt so cherished. To celebrate their union, the king had arranged a spectacular display of fireworks. Hand in hand, they watched as the sky lit up above them. A fleeting happiness that Shin-won could only watch from a distance, knowing it was never meant for him. That night, Sorang was summoned. She and the king shared drinks, and she got a little tipsy. At one point, she stumbled and fell into his arms. They locked eyes. Sorang leaned in and kissed him. The king, unable to resist any longer, embraced her and gently removed her sash. That night, the two of them finally consummated their relationship. Meanwhile, Do-suk was back at his residence when he discovered a box containing a slip of paper. It listed the engagement date of the eldest daughter of the Seo family. Inside was also a portrait of the bride-to-be. To his shock, it was Sorang. He recalled how he had hinted to her many times, asking if she was indeed the Seo family's daughter. But Sorang had never admitted it. That denial had truly broken Do-suk's heart. Sorang, still glowing with joy from her night with the king, was soon approached by a young girl from outside the palace. The child handed her a letter. When Sorang opened it, she learned her grandfather was gravely ill. Without hesitation, she begged the king for permission to visit home. The king agreed. At home, her ailing grandfather immediately called her, Her Highness the Royal Consort. Sorang's cousin said he must be delirious from the fever. But the old man warned Sorang not to stay in the palace much longer, explaining that the Queen Dowager was becoming increasingly dangerous. That night, while Sorang was preparing medicine, Do-suk appeared. It had been a long time since they last saw each other. He asked her directly how she was doing. Sorang, now officially the king's woman, replied, "You knew this day would come." She confirmed she had already become the king's consort. Do-suk asked why she had never admitted she was his intended bride. Why hadn't she helped him? Why had she hidden her identity? Sorang explained tearfully that her life hadn't been easy either. Hiding her identity had been her only option. But Do-suk confronted her, asking if it was because she didn't have any divine power since he had already checked into it. Just then, the king appeared and overheard their conversation. After only a few days of love, heartbreak had arrived. With Sorang's deception revealed, the king was deeply hurt. He ordered that she not be allowed back into the palace. Sorang could only weep in silence. And worse, outside the palace walls, the Queen Dowager had already set her sights on Sorang. In her growing malice, she sent assassins to eliminate her. Behind Sorang was a steep cliff, and it looked like she was moments from falling to her death. Just then, Do-suk arrived and witnessed Sorang being slashed and falling into the lake below the cliff. He immediately dove into the water to save her, but he was quickly exhausted and lost consciousness as well. Days later, a kind family passing by discovered the two unconscious by the lakeside. They rescued them both. Do-suk eventually regained consciousness, and under the careful nursing of Shin-won, Sorang also woke up. Shin-won told them they were welcome to stay in her home for as long as they needed. Meanwhile, the day for the Queen Dowager's selection of the new queen consort was drawing near. Shin-won was one of the candidates. She had a scar on her face from a past incident involving the treasonous officials and the stepmother's secret trafficking ring. Although she hadn't been kidnapped, the scar remained as a painful reminder. Still, she kept it hidden with a veil. Sorang's stepmother had continued running the illegal girls' organization in hopes of pushing her biological daughter, Hyun-min, into the royal position. But Sorang had made up her mind not to let their scheme succeed. When the day of the selection arrived, noble ladies from different families arrived in palanquins. Hyun-min was dressed lavishly, showing off. When Shin-won removed her veil, though a scar marked her face, it didn't diminish her beauty. Hyun-min mocked her, saying that someone with a scar didn't deserve to attend. At that moment, Sorang appeared, disguised as Shin-won's maidservant. Hyun-min was stunned to see Sorang alive. Clearly, the assassins her stepmother had sent had failed. The selection process officially began. The Queen Dowager explained the importance of the queen consort and announced that there would be 3 rounds of evaluation. The first round was embroidery, meant to assess each woman's character and grace through her needlework. Once again, Sorang's stepmother had made secret arrangements. She bribed the attendants to swap out the real embroidery works. As the judges reviewed the results, the Queen Dowager praised the craftsmanship across the board but had to pick a winner. The best piece, according to the identification tag, belonged to Hyun-min. She wore a smug smile. But Shin-won was confused. She had clearly done that embroidery. How did it end up marked with Hyun-min's name? It turned out that the palace maid had already been bribed to switch the tags. Hyun-min acted humble as the Queen Dowager praised her. Shin-won tried to speak up, asking the maid if a mistake had been made. But the maid reminded her that no one was allowed to speak unless asked. Not only had her work been stolen, but she was also expected to remain silent. Hyun-min smirked. Meanwhile, outside the palace, the king had seen Sorang again but couldn't bring himself to speak to her. Yet Sorang chose to return, this time accompanying Shin-won as her maid for the queen selection. Hyun-jim also continued in the next round of the selection. By now, the process had entered the second phase, evaluating etiquette and refinement. During a tea ceremony, Sorang noticed something strange. Looking closely, she spotted a red substance on one of the teacups. She quickly warned Shin-won not to drink. Heeding the advice, Shin-won avoided the tea. Soon, another contestant, a lady seated at the back, drank her tea and broke out in a red rash. The Queen Dowager ordered her to be taken out immediately. It turned out the tea had been deliberately tampered with. Sorang informed Shin-won that the cups had been smeared with something. They both suspected it was Hyun-jim and her mother's doing. To turn the tables, Shin-won calmly offered a cup to Hyun-jim, who panicked, thinking it was poisoned. Her fear made her behave erratically in front of the Queen Dowager. Shin-won then formally reported to the Queen Dowager that someone had deliberately tampered with the tea to sabotage the selection. The Queen Dowager halted the process and summoned all the young women and their maids for inspection. She had identified a substance, sap from a certain plant, as the cause of the rash and ordered everyone to raise their hands for examination. Sorang, who had accidentally touched the sap while investigating, began to panic. Slowly, she raised her hands, stained with the incriminating substance. The Queen Dowager, thinking Sorang was the culprit, was furious and ordered her imprisoned in the royal dungeon. The Queen Dowager went to find Sorang's father and asked if he had 2 daughters. It was then revealed that Sorang was his true eldest daughter, while Hyun-jim, the second daughter, had been impersonating the identity of the firstborn all along. That day, the king was finally ready to abolish the marriage ban, as the new queen consort would be officially selected. When the Queen Dowager announced the name, 2 women stepped forward. Hyun-jim sensed something was wrong. Sorang, her supposed dead sister, also walked up. It turned out Sorang was the real noble daughter. The Queen Dowager and the king had secretly investigated the truth. Hyun-jim tried to defend herself, but Sorang exposed that Hyun-jim was born of the stepmother and had lived under a false identity. Over the years, the stepmother had tried to eliminate Sorang to cover up the truth. This time, Sorang's father stepped forward. He recalled how kind and gentle Sorang had always been, and he publicly acknowledged her as his rightful firstborn. He also admitted that Hyun-jim was the second daughter and begged forgiveness for failing to manage his household properly, which allowed the stepmother to torment Sorang. The stepmother was sentenced and brought to justice. Hyun-jim was exiled to a remote region to work as a servant. Before the people of Joseon, Sorang was rightfully named the new queen consort. She and the king embraced in joy as he officially abolished the 7-year marriage ban. Cheers erupted across the kingdom. From that moment, Sorang and the king began their happily ever after. Later, the Queen Dowager announced that before the royal wedding, the king and Sorang were not allowed to see each other. As the future queen, Sorang had to learn the proper court etiquette. The king was clearly impatient and reluctant to be apart from her. The Queen Dowager reassured him that she would personally care for her future granddaughter-in-law and promptly pulled Sorang away, leaving the king with a pitiful expression. The Queen Dowager thanked Sorang for helping the king move past his grief and trauma. She acknowledged that Sorang was now the person her grandson cherished most, and she, too, would cherish Sorang as her own. The next day, Sorang began her training in court etiquette. The palace teacher was just as strict as ever and expected Sorang to perform perfectly even as she learned. The day of Sorang's royal wedding finally arrived. Even her grandfather and Hain-yong came to visit. Sorang said it was a miracle she could become the queen of Joseon. Her grandfather replied that it was the reward for all her hardships and suffering. Now that she had become the queen consort, she had to assist the king in serving the people. And so, Sorang wore the heaviest crown, becoming the most honored woman in the nation. A year passed. Sorang had fully adapted to palace life. The king looked at her with nothing but joy and affection. The two were truly a couple blessed by the heavens. They even began planning for a family. As for Do-suk, he was also granted a happy ending. The kind-hearted Shin-won was destined to be his partner. At first glance, Do-suk was smitten with Shin-won's beauty, and Shin-won found his handsomeness charming as well. At long last, Do-suk had his own romance. Eventually, they formed a family of their own, with their children playing happily in the courtyards. Since the king abolished the marriage ban, the happiness of Joseon's people had greatly improved. Sorang and the king would now regularly tour the countryside to learn about the lives of their people, openly showing their love before them. Thanks for watching. Please like, subscribe and drop a heart if you love the series.